Hey trainers, Totodile and I are back with some more Pokemon video magic. And for today's video, what I'm going to do is showcase some open Ultra League battles featuring the Ultra Beast Guzzlord. And Guzzlord came around, maybe a couple of months ago. Time and space are really flowing together for me lately. But Guzzlord came out not long ago. I was not able to power one up for the last Ultra League rotation, so I built one now. And in case anybody else was thinking about whether they want to power one up for the Ultra League or wanted to see it in action, I thought I would go ahead and do a little shoutcast for this enormous Ultra Beast. As you can see on the screen, this thing is a giant. Like the perspective of the screen has to like zoom out for you to even get part of its body there. So anyway, I come across a Komo at the beginning here, and that's kind of a neutral matchup with Guzzlord because they're both dragon types. And I am fortunately able to catch the Dragon Claw onto my shiny Kanto muck, which I'm really, really proud of. And you can see other videos featuring this Pokemon elsewhere on my channel. And my opponent responds with a Machamp. And Machamp is not especially a response to a Kanto muck. Unlike the Alolan muck, which is part dark type, right? Which means that fighting moves do like neutral damage to it. The Kanto muck is a pure poison type, so it's resisting all the fighting type charge moves. So my opponent has double fighting here, which is kind of interesting. And then they bring in Giratina. So Giratina altered is going to take super effective damage from Guzzlord, but Guzzlord might take some super effective damage from the Giratina. So the idea there was just to chunk as much damage as possible using the Talonflame there, and then come in with the Guzzlord. I already had some energy built up, and I'm hoping I can farm down, which I can before they get to their next move, and then they quit before coming back in with the Komo. So that was kind of an interesting team. My opponent had double fighter, double dragon with the cross typings, so I'm not sure what they do if they hit a fairy type Pokemon. I think that would probably be very difficult for them. But it's really good if you come across primarily dark types, which are abundant in the Ultra League. So high risk, high reward team. It was very fun to play. Good game to my opponent. I'm still talking about game one, and we're already over here in game two, so I guess I'll get into it. My opponent led a Granbull, and of course the two Pokemon in my back line are there specifically to cover potential fairy types up front. And my opponent safe swaps into a Swampert, and they let my Brave Bird go through, so I knew if I double shielded I could take Switch, and I ended up thinking that taking Switch was going to be more important than actually keeping the shields, because I knew that my Muck could really do well against that Granbull, but I had to pretty much at all costs keep my Guzzlord away from the Granbull. So fortunately, I was able to take Switch, and I think that's going to work out because the fast move damage, I'm not really going to need to get shields here. I'm going to try to give myself every possible win condition. But yeah, Blast Burn is going to be resisted here. Anything this Typhlosion can throw is going to be resisted here. So I was just more or less counting on being able to do enough damage with fast moves or like the little bait charge moves to actually be able to take that game. So sometimes going down 2 shields is okay if your fast move damage can take care of the rest of that opponent's team, as it did for me in this particular case. Okay, moving into game 3, we've got Guzzlord into Talonflame. This is pretty good. This is more or less where I want to see the Talonflame. Muck has an okay matchup against the Talonflame because of Thunder Punch. Okay, so something that I did on purpose there, you probably noticed that I did an extra Dragon Claw, or a Dragon Tail, so I could have thrown a Dragon Claw sooner. And the reason I did that was to hopefully get the charge move priority tie, which I did. So at the moment that I threw my Dragon Claw was the same moment that my opponent threw their Brave Bird. And so what that meant was, even though I was going to have to give up a shield, they were going to have to give up a shield as well, because they just tanked their defense, and then they were stuck with me throwing my charge move before they could switch out. My opponent brought in a Sylveon. Of course, I already have a response to that with the Kanto Muck. I did have to use up a shield there because Psyshock would have been super effective. And what do you know? They have a Typhlosion again in the background there. So I matched with Talonflame, Fire type against Fire type, and I was planning to Brave Bird. But my opponent went ahead and brought in their own Talonflame, and because I was already mid-animation for my Incinerate, that meant that my timing was just a little above where theirs was, so I just barely got to that Brave Bird before my opponent could get to their own. And then, of course, Guzzlord can close the game against pretty much any elemental type. This is a ideal situation again, an ideal situation again here, because neither of my Pokemon in the back want anything to do with Swampert. Ground is super effective against poison, and water is super effective against fire. So I'm doing my best with Guzzlord here, and I just made a really bad mistake in this game. I was assuming that my opponent would be using Smackdown. I was not paying attention to the fast move, so they're not using Smackdown on their Aggron. Instead, they are using Dragon Tail for the fast move, which means that I could have safely brought in my Talonflame, and Talonflame would be doing far better in this matchup than the Muck. So now I have lost, because Aggron is so incredibly bulky, now I've lost both switch advantage and shield advantage, which is not great. I came back in with Guzzlord because I didn't think they would quite have a move ready, and I anticipated I might be able to farm them down, but that wasn't going to happen, so I swapped into Talonflame, hoping to catch that Steel move. Yep. And my opponent has a Machamp in the back, which would normally be fine. Talonflame does pretty well against fighting types, except now I'm down a shield because of that poor switch in the middle of the game, and that means that they're going to be able to get to 2 Rock Slides, which is what they need to take down my Talonflame, and I just don't have enough health left on my Guzzlord to be able to close out this game. I do have the Dragon Claw loaded to get the shield, but one Mud Shot was enough to take out the Guzzlord. So the moral of the story is always check your opponent's fast moves before making a swap, kids. I just assumed it would be going with the standard move set, but running Dragon Tail worked out pretty well for my opponent and their Aggron. And Aggron is a very cool pick for the Ultra League, so nicely done. Good game to my opponent. Okay, coming into this last game, my opponent has a Jellicent up front, which is really good for me unless they are running Ice Beam. It does look like they're experiencing some lag, so you can probably tell that I stopped tapping a couple of times there to see if my opponent would start using their fast moves again. And I don't think this one's going to pan out. My opponent is really having trouble getting those fast moves through, so I'm just farming to see if anything will change, and my opponent decides to quit. So I am able to get a 4-1 set there, but because I normally feature at least five full battles for y'all in these videos, I recorded an extra bonus battle so that y'all have a full 5th battle to see here. And the bonus battle I have also been really excited for because it is going to feature Ampharos, and Ampharos recently gained the ability to learn the charge move Brutal Swing. Ampharos already had some pretty good coverage against Ultra League meta, such as flying types like Talonflame, but giving it Brutal Swing adds so much coverage because Psychic and Ghost types are also very, very common in the Ultra League. So I'm really excited about the addition of Brutal Swing. Because I do really poorly against ground types like XL, Galarian, Stunfisk, I do have a fighting type and a water type in the back. So here I have my Virizion. And if you're interested in a video on Virizion, I think my last upload before this one is a showcase for Shiny Virizion in the Ultra League. And that one's pretty fun. You should check it out if you have the chance. So in this case, my opponent probably should have been going for Rock Slides instead of Earthquake against the Virizion because of that grass typing resisting the ground typing. But I did wait to tank a little bit of damage so that there wouldn't be as much farm on the Talonflame. I probably could have waited to take a little bit more damage because I did give it a pretty significant amount of farm there, which is not great. I wanted to protect my Ampharos here, so I decided to come in with the Jellicent, and I did not want to get hit by a boosted Brave Bird. A normal Brave Bird I could have survived and still had a fair amount of health left. Boosted Brave Bird, not so much. And my opponent ends up having a Cofagrigus in the back. So because my opponent is up on shields, I go for a bait here. 1, to see if I can get a shield, which I do, and 2, because I think it will come in handy for having that debuff, because Cofagrigus is a really hard-hitting Pokemon. So now is when we can put Brutal Swing to good use. We've got a Ghost type here, we get that last shield, I'm charging up, and don't quite make it to Brutal Swing number 2. I don't know how much damage Brutal Swing is going to do to an Ultra League Cofagrigus. Also, I don't know if Cofagrigus has to be XL'd to get into the Ultra League, so this one might be extra beefy. Okay, so we do a decent amount of damage to the Cofagrigus, but they are going to get a move through, and Ampharos is kind of glassy, so yeah, I think Shadow Ball would have regularly taken us out, but fortunately, that Bubble Beam from Jellicent reduced the attack on the Cofagrigus, and we get to that last Brutal Swing. So the challenge of having Brutal Swing on Ampharos is that it's non-stab, so maybe you don't get as much damage out of it as you might from a Dark-type Pokemon like Guzzlord, but even so, it gives it certainly some offense that it didn't have before, and the ability to do some nice damage, even if it doesn't, you know, work to KO everything immediately, right? So Ampharos has that nice addition there, and Guzzlord is really good. I've really enjoyed it. As far as the Ultra Beasts go, it is top tier, like it is up there with Buzzwole, I think. So I've really enjoyed using it, and if you're on the fence about building one, I recommend it. It's pretty fun. If you enjoyed the content for the video, please go ahead and give a like and subscribe if you aren't already, and I hope to have more content ready for you soon. Until next time, trainers.